And this is the Futures Forum. Do you want me? Greetings and welcome to the Jamaica Diaspora Show. We invite the Futures Forum with Dr. Claire Nelson, the Institute of Caribbean Studies. Greetings, Dr. Nelson.
Greetings. It's so good. We're the second to last day of the month of February, Black History Month, and it's been exciting to see everybody just really flourishing and sharing information about our history.
Great, good. In fact, you've been doing quite a bit during Black History Month. Let's hear what it's been like for you.
Well, I have been doing the we did the Social Justice Day, World Social Justice Day last week, February. On my ICS side of my life, I have two lives, as you know. So on the Institute of Caribbean Studies side of my life, we did the World Social Justice Day, February 20th, Caribbean contributions to social justice, and really learned a lot from our fabulous speakers, which focused on, people like Shirley Chisholm and Marcus Garvey and Claudia Jones and Kwame Ture and Michael Falwell, really talking about all the things that we have contributed to Black Americans, civil rights and social justice movement throughout the decades and almost centuries, actually.
Right.
So we started by mentioning John Ross Rome, that the first Black newspaper in America was started by a combination of an American and a Jamaican immigrant. And so it kind of led off into what we did this last week on the Futures Forum side, a series every lunch hour. We posted a conversation on what I call signifying the future history of Black America. And this year I interviewed 6 fabulous African Americans who have been doing things in different spaces, and this actually is the 4th year that I've been doing this. I started back in 2018.
Okay, so I mean, tell us more about some of the things that you were able to, highlight as far as the interviews went.
Well, this year we interviewed. Let me see if I can remember. Dr. Julian Malveaux, Dr. James Carvin. So Dr. James Carvin is a professor at John Hopkins, and he also runs the Center for African Studies. We met actually at a Futures conference many years ago. Dr. Julian Malveaux is an economist and public intellectual, so you sometimes see on TV punditing on things. George Smith is one of the co-founder of NSBE, National Society of Black Engineers. Tim Fielder is a graphic Afrofuturist, and he has a new novel out called Infinitum by HarperCollins, which is a new Black superhero, quote unquote, for the future. Natasha Womack is a well-known Black Afrofuturist, and she's a filmmaker and author, and really has won a scholarship, a lot of scholarship around Afrofuturism. And Dr. James Pope, an old friend and new friend at the same time, he actually is a media and cultural anthropologist and professor at Winston-Salem State University, and very much a futurist in thinking about how we use culture to shape things. And so we started on Monday, and we sort of carried through the period, if you will.
Okay, so I really want to dig into what the future is for Black America, or for the Black experience. What is the future? From the future sense.
From the future sense, well, everybody had a different perspective on things, right? Different perspective on things. And so what we found was over the course of the 6 days, we learned really a lot in terms of the, how would I put it, the the education sector, tertiary education sector. We discussed with Dr. Calvin, who focuses on trade and community economic development, his ideas about how things might play out. And he's the one that actually brought to my mind when I had been talking about having a 4-year turning radius, right, with this new administration. He's like, no, you don't have 4 years. We have 2 years. I'm like, oh my God, which means we have actually 1 year and 11 months left because the next election is already beginning to be contested, and you're seeing the ads already, and the very hostile ads. And we talked about how community economic development might shape up, and how institutions like John Hopkins, where he is, which is a mainframe institution, still doesn't understand how to work with Black communities. So even as a business professor, right, that's his main quote unquote gig, and his secondary gig is as the director of the Center of Africana Studies, trying to link the two and to do diversity, etc., conversations or race conversations in those places very challenging because people don't feel they need it. So it's just very challenging to have a conversation with people don't want to hear or don't want to be open to the conversation. So that was very insightful, and he really, laid it on pretty thick in terms of what he think would have to happen. I can't remember, it was such a rich and long conversation, but I do remember him talking about the universities and the challenge he has as a Black professor of long standing, trying to work and then being put in charge of all these diversity things, but nobody really doesn't want to talk about it. So it's challenging. We talked a little bit about how Centers for Africana Studies, though, which are where most mainstream economic universities such as John Hopkins and Harvard and those big ones have their Black agenda, quote unquote, could maybe do things differently collectively to have. What I am interested in doing is shaping the conversation on getting us to be prepared for decolonizing the future. And he was optimistic to some extent that if they came together, they might be able to put a needle of thought of a little shift, in how we think about the responsibilities of, quote unquote, a black vice president. What does it really mean if the Black vice president is really president of all America? He's not the vice president for Black people, right? There would have to be like a secretary for Black people for that to happen. So that was interesting. Julia Norvo is an economist, and she's very much progressive economist. And so we had some pretty heated discussions, very rich as well, talking about, people want to work and should get a minimum wage, a living wage. The reparations issue came up, very heated there, because most people know I'm not a supporter of the reparations, and you can certainly ask me about that. But she certainly made a case for it. I have more spiritual reasons why I don't support it, spiritual and emotional and psychological reasons why I don't support it. As conceived currently, anyway, I should say. Maybe specify that as conceived currently. But that was also a rich discussion because I really was talking to her about how do we let Black people understand more about how the economy really works, because most Black people don't understand how the economy really works.
What do you? I mean, I'm sure you had to have the discussion. Well, you did have the discussion with Kamala Harris as the vice president in that future, because she will grow in the role that she's in now. How do you see her shaping the future as a prominent political figure?
Well, the question is she prepared to even psychologically take on the Black burden on the Black tax? Obama certainly was not. He didn't take it on. He really governed from the center. So is Kamala going to place herself squarely as a Black person or a woman of color, since she has also Indian blood, and deal with minorities as general, or will she also govern as a centrist? And I think she's going to govern as a centrist. Now, if she's clever, looking at the future, and they're really able to pivot very quickly, what they would do is ensure that they have put in place the institutional shifts that have to take place at the local level, right? And so the federal government can make space by creating more robust economic development plans and trainings that are targeting not just the surface agendas, but also what I call the deep-rooted shifts that have to take place for America to be prosperous in the future. We cannot continue to consume as much as we consume with don't manufacture. So in that case, I hate to say it, but Trump was right. He got to bring some of those jobs back home. The challenge is that in a democratic capitalist society, capital goes where it's going to make the most profit. And you don't make the most profit if you do it here in America. And that's the reality. So the question then, what has to change? And she and I talked about this whole issue of how do you share the quote unquote the benefits of wealth by having more employee share ownership stock programs, more and different types of corporate ownerships. I don't know any reason why more American companies do not build employee share ownership programs into a way of making sure that the base of their companies are benefiting. And I think it'll be a very easy way. It's not easy to do, it takes work, but it's an easy way to give people who are working in factories at the base earning, $8 an hour, a part of what they are creating. And I think, to me, everybody would win. The companies would win. The people would feel like less put upon that they are just working, slaving for a dollar in wage-related work. And of course, we talk about the prison industrial complex in that, if we don't deal with this whole issue of not educating and investing the money on the front end to educate people, so we can, in fact, create the intellectual capital to invest in creating more wealth with new products, be they products from, food or energy or water or space or whatever, then we're going to always need a system in which somebody has to be exploited. And that's going to be us. So the whole system has to shift. So we had a lot of common ground in that, I think, because my take is that reparations in the absence of a complete overhaul, or certainly if not a complete overhaul, a 50% overhaul of the actual economic system, for me, is like selling my grandparents or my great-grandparents or great-great-grandparents again for 30 pieces of silver. Because we haven't changed the system. Nothing will have changed.
Okay, so the subject of leadership. Okay, now I want to bring this up because, Martin Luther King, some of the historical people that you referenced earlier, we had prominent leaders, Black leaders. When we think of, the leadership now, is there a void? Because some people were saying there's a void, and then some people were saying that leadership is emerging. So let's hear your thoughts on leadership, because, we just came out of the Trump administration, which certainly set us back in some areas.
Well, I think we have a void for the 21st century, right? And this is why I've been pushing so strongly the need for a Black futurism that goes beyond the Afrofuturism, cute artistic ideas of speculative fiction and Wakanda, we were kings and queens, tropes, which to me, it's good for like psychological upliftment or emotional enhancement, but doesn't really address policy, okay? And so in the Caribbean, for example, I believe that there should be an Institute for the Future at the University of the West Indies, or as a standalone at CARICOM, that actually is looking out and saying, okay, here is where the world is shaping up. China is moving in this direction. India is moving in this direction. America is moving in the direction. We're in the Americas, so there's not much we can do because we're going to always be hemmed in by America to some extent. But how do we best move to create a better future? And then, therefore, if reparations are on the table, what is it we want to create to make our lives more fair? How do we make sure that the people at the base are economically repaired? Because reparations cannot address the emotional and other burdens that we bear of having Black skin, all right? It's not going to address racism. It's not going to address even the Caribbean, the fact that the structure of the economy in the Caribbean is owned by Indians, whites, and Chinese. So let's be real. Reparations is not going to benefit the average Black person in Caribbean. Reparations in America, let's say, and we had a conversation, is it reparations for slavery time or reparation on the post-Reconstruction era time when there were literally Black businesses burnt, right? And nothing was given. So that's a clear legal ramification. The state should have given them insurance or whatever for all the businesses that were burnt down, etc., etc. How can you pay reparations for lynching. How are you going to deal with that? And so they have not properly addressed. And the Truth and Reconciliation Commission in the American context, again, without the lookout at the future and having an institute for the future from a Black perspective that says, okay, what would America look like if we really were repaired? What would economic equality really look like? And if you haven't thought about that scenario and actually, simulated it and figured who would lose then if capitalism remains a thing, then what are we saying? What are we really saying? Because trust me, we'll still be a minority, right? If we're in a minority in America, 2030 will be still a minority. So even though they become a majority minority country, in numbers, Black people who look like you and myself will still be minorities, right? Numerically. So we're still be living in a yes, you'll have enough Hispanics, but most of the Hispanics consider themselves white. So how is that going to change the positioning of Black people in the culture? And number one, if we were to be paid, and two, how is that going to address things like the educational disparities, the access to healthcare disparities in our communities, the ownership of the means of production disparities? If reparations are not going to address that, then what are we doing? We're basically giving people a check, which is what many people think it is, to go and buy more sneakers. Really? Mm. And they've had Black people say to me, well, nobody should tell us how to spend the money. If we want to go and buy sneakers, that's our business. Well, you're telling me you're going to sell my great-great-grandmother again for sneakers? I have a problem with that. And you know what is true, Mark? What always also pisses me? That the fact that you even say nobody tell the Japanese how to spend their money or the Jews to spend money. You can't compare the Jewish Holocaust and the Japanese internment of 3 years or 6 years or whatever to 400 years of subjugation and an entire global Western economic system that is built on the enslavement and the degradation of Black people. Our culture, our religions, our languages, our names, everything that makes you human was stripped down and stripped of its dignity. So how are you going to pay cash for that?
Okay, so that's a good point. Now, okay, so we talk about home ownership that for the most part contributed significantly to wealth development for American citizens, which home ownership was denied to a large extent to the Black population. Through reparations, couldn't there be some format in which, like home ownership, because home ownership gave people a foundation and an opportunity to create wealth, because there's so much you can do with home ownership.
Wealth, right?
Right. Okay. So in what way can we lay a foundation through reparations to establish a foundation to create wealth?
So I would say if we're going to look at, let's say, home ownership and access to land as a foundation for building Black economic equity, certainly in America, and even in the Caribbean region, where still we have lots of people living in slums, etc., and no affordable housing that they can own, then we need to look at then what is going to be the economy of the future, right? So we're moving now into Industry 4.0, where we're talking about making everything robotic and intelligent and smart and giving people a universal basic income. Now, I would hate to think that we're basically reducing people, quote unquote, to a basic income to do what? To do what? So I have a problem with that as well. Now, I don't think people should have an income, a livable, thriving income, a living wage, etc. But I have a problem with fundamentally saying it's okay if people lose their jobs because everybody will have a universal basic income and they can go home, they can stay home and just be whatever. No, we are humans. We must have things. We must have a purpose. We must have a value. And a universal income that says stay home and do nothing except watch TV and consume crap basically is reducing us to being less than the robots we are creating. How does that make sense? So just like how New Jersey and Oregon decided, you know what, we're not going to put automated gas pumps in our state because we need some low income jobs that people can work and make a living, right? We have to make some tough decisions about what is the future we want. We're at a critical time in human history, and COVID has come to slow us down. Praise God. And I hate to say that, but we were moving too fast for ourselves. And a lot of us have been at home now thinking, oh my God, is this what the future is going to look like? We're going to be living on these tubes in a matrix and we can only go with a mask. Is this really what the next 20, 30 years will look like? And if you say, oh, that's impossible, we'll all be vaccinated. But guess what? The virus fear has not been mapped, Mark. The virus fear has not been mapped. There are millions more viruses than there are people in the world. Okay?
Mm.
So let us say that this is just one of a few viruses which we have mapped. Suppose we continue flashing the trees and burning the days and climate change and unleashes some virus which we have never even mapped yet. And people are going out to space and doing things and saying, well, nothing is going to happen. It's the callous disregard based on a Western industrial educated mindset that says we need to go out and conquer the world and own the world and colonize the world. And we're taking the same attitude to the way we explore the oceans and the deep ocean beds, and the same attitude to which we explore the cosmos. And we have to find a way to slow down that impulse to be conqueror and convert it into a more civilized, if you will, state of being that says we belong to the earth, we belong to the cosmos, and therefore let all of us get some futures literacy. Certainly there are politicians in every state should be having a futures commission for that state. In every country in the Caribbean should have a futures commission for that country, so that we make sure that our children and grandchildren, you just had a grandchild born recently. What world is that grandchild going to live in 2050 when they're only 30 years old? Will they be able to eat a nice, ripe, juicy mango the way we have been able to eat, a real juicy mango? Or will they be eating a virtual mango in a VR holodeck?
Mm. Yes.
And that's the challenge we face. And so we had a really rich discussion. We also heard from George Smith, who was at National Center of Black Engineers. He talked about, and you're going to love this, a math mobilization movement.
Okay.
And his vision is that if we could actually prepare people for this future now, it means we have to have more math numeracy, right? And so Black people have to be numerate. They just not have to read. There's have to be more of us numerate in math. And how we're going to create a math numeracy that prepares them for jobs in STEM, robotics, AI, machine learning, quantum computing, all the things that are coming down the stream, for which we're now importing people into America, and our people can't qualify for those jobs, right? Mm-hmm. So his vision, and I love it and I share it, and I really want to get this out there, that, well, his vision was smaller than mine. I kind of blew it up a little bit, but I said, you're thinking too small, you're thinking too small. So we ended the show by saying, okay, we want a vision where we have, by the next 3 years, right, we're going to have in place 150,000 math mentors, right? So each person who is capable of supporting somebody in math, preferably a college student, right, will support a college student in math. That college student in turn will be supported, given a small internship, like, to do some peer counseling to high school students. And the high school students will be now doing some peer counseling to the juniors high students. And the junior highs will be doing peer counseling to the elementary school. And so we thought, with that pattern, if we had a pattern like that, where we have, a chain of what, 150 to 150 to 150 to 150, that's 4 times 150, that's what, 6,000, right? We could have 6,000 math mentors. Now we can talk about we're making a drop in the bucket, because our assumption is that Each of those 6,000 people have influence over 9 other people that they're not necessarily mentoring or peer counseling, but are who are observing what they're doing, right? And so we can then multiply in kids of 10. So we're now racking our brains with how we start. But I'm putting it out there because I do believe that there's enough professionals out there who are engineers, physicists, chemists, that can just basically do math mentoring for first year college math. I'm not talking about math mentoring for people who are doing a math major and then doing topography and all these high level things. I'm talking about math mentoring so that the first year student who has not yet decided fully if they want to stay in sciences and STEM but might be struggling and really hate math, mentor that person so they stay in math and feel confident that they have the capability to do math. So that's what we're talking about. And then they can go into engineering or, another scientific field.
Okay. And
so very exciting.
Okay. So you want to, who else were you?
And so we also talked to both Gitasha and Tim Field are Afrofuturists. So they're very much the creatives in this space. They're writing books, they're doing films, movies. And it was interesting to talk to them because they were really able to talk about how do we then take the speculative fiction that they're working with and turn it into and help people make the leap then from speculative fiction to what's possible on the ground right now. Right? And then we talked about the need for also maybe using some of that speculative fiction and actually writing new material that's more based on our current problem. So it's not just out in space in some fictional country which has, rocks that nobody knows the names of, right? But a speculative fiction based on rocks that we have here on Earth, right? And making it much more anchored in the reality of the future. And of course, I was pushing the SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals, as a way to anchor ourselves in the future. And then 2050, which is a year for climate change, where we have to make sure by 2050 that we have reached the 1.5 centigrade cap on how much increase in the temperature. And, we're fighting against that, right? So this administration has joined back the climate agreement, and Bloomberg is leading America's efforts in really trying to get cities to be sustainable to help us meet these targets. Because if we look at the weather and what happened in Texas, that's what climate change means. It means everything is kind of topsy-turvy. And so how do we teach those things from an Afrofuturist perspective? And how do we use Afrofuturism to also help the policymakers get out of their box of thinking? So we're looking at, can we have a conversation with people like them with politicians at the local level who would never read a book by any one of them, right? To say, educate about how do you create a world that doesn't exist and what is the shift you have to make? And so we're really excited again about how do we partner then with groups like National Policy Alliance to make this real and have the kind of training that opens the eyes of politicians, local level, city council, school boards that can look at how do you change school boards. I mean, it's embarrassing to be in Washington, D.C., for example, for me personally, where there's so many people of African descent who are in school board, and our schools are failing. How can that be? So clearly we're not doing enough to building the parent teachers associations. If the parents don't have the capacity, then this system has to deal with the fact that the parents themselves are not capable of providing the support for the kids. And how can we as a society provide that so kids get the support they need to do better in school so we don't have to put them in prison? So those are the kind of things we discussed. And finally, Dr. James Pope, he runs a project called Africa World Now, and he's been traveling all across Latin America. He focuses a lot on Cuba and Brazil, and he does some work in Africa. And he's rated just 2 shows on the radio. And he talked about, as a cultural anthropologist and also running the Africana Studies Center there at Winston-Salem State University, how he sees the culture and the cultural resistance of the past being brought into today so we can create a better future. And how is it we can teach history differently so that people don't just go, oh, back in the day we were kings and queens. I mean, sometimes when I hear that, I go like, oh, here we go again, romanticizing the past. Hello, there were also wars in Africa. That's why we were sold into slavery. Duh, let's not forget that, right? So let's romanticize the past. How has Africa then learned from its past, its colonial challenges, the fact they're still colonies really of a Western system? And how then do we reimagine that future in which, if Black America are the richest Black people in the world in terms of cash money, right? And Africa is the richest continent in the world in terms of resources, then okay, cash money, resources, what are we not seeing? What is the missing pieces that we have to put in place? So what are the cultural things we have to change now so we can do better in the future? So we have a lot of cultural problems among ourselves as Blacks because we've been brought up in a very Western society. So we're not thinking about collective economics. Everybody wants to get rich for themselves. That's why you see the farce of people like, Bob Johnson saying, I'm going to vote for Trump, but the devil I know, because he's only for himself. I mean, you find very few of the wealthy Blacks who are going out and investing in communities, in schools, like, a LeBron James. You see, he's doing what he can. And I commend him for that, So he's making an institutional change. But how many of the athletes and the famous movie stars who are sitting on $1 million are doing that kind of social activism? And guess what? When somebody tries to do it at that level, like a Nipsey, right? He gets killed. Okay? So what are we saying when a rapper and that is actually trying to make social change at the base in the hood, right? Providing workspaces for people, etc., gets killed? What does it say? That we shouldn't try? We should just do for self? And I find like a Marcus Garvey was hounded out of existence. So Malcolm X was killed. So at some point, you see the challenge. We may want to do it. We kind of get afraid. We're afraid to step into that space, some of us, because we know we might get killed. That's the reality. That's why Black Wall Street was burned down, because they were actually practicing a collective way of economics that would probably stress the system, which says you must do it through these big companies. I think there's enough people, not just Black people. I think there's enough people in America right now, in the progressive new economics movement, in the climate movement, in the gender movement, in the LGBTQ movement, that actually have a very clear picture that we cannot continue a capitalism based on exploitation of either the natural resources or people. Our capitalism has to be morphed into what we're calling, what some of us are calling conscious capitalism, right? Most of us, well, I certainly don't believe in quote unquote communism. Let me make that quite clear, right? I also don't believe in a universal basic income. I don't believe in it because I feel it's going to create some lazy ass people, and I don't believe in it, right? Because nobody explained to me what would people be doing. So everybody must have meaningful work. Meaningful work could be an artist. The meaningful work could be a florist. The meaningful work could be a gardener. The meaningful work could be a kindergarten caretaker. But people must have value to society. Otherwise, we become destructive. We become murderers, rapers, child traffickers, and all because our minds get warped when we don't use them to the fullness of the creativity of good. If you're not creating good, you will be creating bad, because humans are meant to create. That's who we are as a species. That's what differs us from dogs and donkeys. We create.
Okay. And so you had other people that you talked to. Now let's go down the list here.
So lastly, again, so just to say recap again, because we're going to be reposting all these probably tomorrow, so hopefully people can get a chance to see it. February 28th. Again, we spoke with Dr. James Calvin this year, Dr. Julian Malvo, George Smith, Tim Fielder, Natasha Womack, and Dr. James Pope. That was our lineup for this year. And it was just very exciting. And of course, if they go to the website, www.thefuturesforum.org, they'd see the ones that were archived, or on our YouTube channel, you'll be able to see the ones that we did in previous years as well. So look for us, The Futures Forum, on YouTube. And you're probably seeing this on YouTube, so just keep on watching. And I really thank you for the opportunity of being on the Jamaica Diaspora first StreamYard live show. Hopefully, we can figure out how to how to make this work in the future and really have what do you call it, an ongoing conversation about the future, so we can begin to educate the Jamaican community about how to think like a futurist.
Well, I do have one final
Yeah,
word.
yeah.
I just want to, with the Biden administration and his commitment to, as he says, having the back of the black and brown people who certainly helped him get into office. How do you see that administration having an impact as far as creating agendas and opportunities
I think
for?
we have, Mark, I think we have to move very quickly, and it's for us to move quickly. We in the community, Jamaicans, African Americans, Hispanics from wherever, Honduras, wherever, have to be better organized and not say like, oh, they're not doing anything. You need to recognize that all politics is local. We need to recognize all politics is local. So if we have an issue in a particular community and we have big, large communities, let's say in Brooklyn, we have big communities in Atlanta, we have big communities in South Florida, where I can know where we are. We have like a whole strip of streets, just Caribbean businesses, right? We don't have that in Maryland where a whole street is a Caribbean business, right? Anymore. We had it at one time, but everybody moved and lived in the nice suburbs now, so that's not anymore. But we need to say then, okay, if I was to be specific, let's take the area around in Brooklyn, right? We have a significant number of Caribbean people in Brooklyn and in Bronx and in Queens. I would like to see us organizing economic development councils specifically, right? And we can do these in partnership with community colleges in those areas. So in Queens, we could work with York. In Brooklyn, we could use with Mega Evers. In Bronx, with Bronx College, Bronx Community College, or one of the other ones. Why? Because you want to institutionalize the change process and the educational process so that it can continue after the current leaders might move on in 2 years and do something else, but you want to always have your succession plan so we continue moving the needle, right? So the next couple months, by September, by even summer, we should have in place community economic development committees, which all will be in the summer months working on developing asset maps and strategic agendas for how they're going to shift to make sure people have healthy food, you have local job creation, right, and a plan for how they're able to feed themselves and improve educational scores for and outcomes for health and education and jobs. That's the minimum. If we're not doing that, we are not serious. We are not serious. Because you can't expect the politicians to spend their days, most of them don't understand what development is about. They have good ideas, but they don't have any way to execute it because they already did it before. Now they can now go to the State House and say, okay, of the money that's coming down in stimulus, we don't want it just to go into cash in the pocket of people's getting a check. We want some of it to go into small business development or micro entrepreneurial people development, right? Mm-hmm. And by the way, we can do it with the college, the state college. Therefore, that money will still be circulating because you have to either use the money to take the bus to go to college, or if you're online, you have to order your stuff online from somebody to do something, or you're paying your teacher at the college to do the training, or you're paying them to do the software and the websites. So the money is still circulating. It's just circulating to create a baseline for a foundation of something else. Let's take housing then. So in these areas where you have a lot of dilapidated housing and you have gentrification, now is the time to think about, can we have a cooperative housing scheme? Then it means the community lawyers and the state governments have to look at cooperative laws. Are cooperative laws easy to navigate? Because I am now trying to create a cooperative, as you may be aware of the ICS, for us as Caribbean people to create a cooperative. And I'm having hell trying to find a cooperative lawyer. There's so few. Right? And those who exist, they don't do it for free. So you still have to come up with some money when you yourself don't have money in the first place. So what you're using is to actually build a thing. So it's like a vicious cycle. So they need to invest in small business offices that support not just setting up LLCs and setting up S corporations, but setting up B corporations and cooperatives for those of us who want to do cooperative economics, which we think going to the better of us in the long run, right? And so these are all kind of institutional changes I would like to see in the next 3 to 6 months. This is not brain surgery. So I get sick and tired of hearing, oh, they need time. They should have thought about it before you got into office.
Mm-hmm.
And have a plan to keep on running. Because if we have a 2-year turnaround before the next election, and we have still a hostile 73 million people who think that democratic socialism is equal to communism, one, democratic socialism means they're going to come and take your gun too, which none of those things mean anything. There's nothing in the book that says if you give people a living wage, you're going to have to give away your gun. Where does it say that?
Mm-hmm.
So we have to bring some truth and realism back to things at the base in Appalachia, in rural Georgia, in rural Maine, and all these areas where people feel left out of the American dream and don't see it in their grasp anymore. We have to basically restart, reframe, and rename and redesign the American dream, because the American dream of the 20th century cannot work in the 21st century in an Industry 4.0 climate challenged world. It cannot.
Well, thank you so much for all of that, and I'm looking forward to whatever happens, and so again, thank you.
Thank you.